"Take off that hat or I'll call the police," Karen shouted, unaware that the man in front of her was the county sheriff. What happened next was a lesson for everyone who witnessed the scene. That day, Karen Dowell was particularly determined to uphold order. She entered her favorite grocery store as if she were conducting an inspection. Her pride and her influence within the community radiated from her manicured fingertips. But that morning, Karen's routine was about to take an unexpected turn. As soon as her heels clicked onto the shiny tile floor, her gaze zeroed in on a bright red spot in the produce section. It was him, a man in his 50s with a confident posture, calmly picking apples. But it wasn't his appearance that drew Karen's attention. It was the bright red MAGA hat on his head. Do people like this still exist? She thought, her disdain palpable. Karen's pulse quickened. This has no place here, she decided, marching straight toward the man. Her heels clattered so loudly that a few shoppers turned their heads. "Excuse me, but this is a public place," she declared, positioning herself as a living barricade in front of him. "I think your hat is entirely inappropriate here." The man looked up from the apples, his gaze calm and friendly. "Good morning," he said with a slight smile. "How can I help you?" Karen crossed her arms, her voice rising. "Take off your hat," she demanded, her eyes narrowing. "You're offending everyone around you." The man frowned slightly and straightened up, his imposing figure now towering over Karen. "I'm just here for groceries like you," he replied evenly. "If this bothers you, perhaps it's worth reconsidering your perspective." Karen wasn't prepared for such a response, her face flushed with color. "Are you lecturing me?" she nearly shouted. "People like you are a disgrace to this community." The man picked up another apple, examining it. "Ma'am," he said calmly, with a hint of sarcasm, "if apples could yell as loudly as you, I'd have switched to another aisle by now." A few shoppers chuckled, but Karen didn't notice. She decided it was time to take stronger action. "You don't understand. I'll call security if you don't take that thing off immediately." The man calmly placed the apple in a bag, his expression unchanged. "Go ahead," he said. "I'm always happy to meet new people." Karen was stunned. Her mind raced with a plan to make this man feel unwelcome. Her fingers reached for her phone. Around her, curious eyes began to gather. Some clearly supported the man, while others seemed to wait eagerly for the drama to unfold. The atmosphere in the store thickened, setting the stage for an inevitable confrontation. Karen, undeterred in her sense of righteousness, stormed off to find a store employee. The manager wasn't available. He was busy counting inventory in the back. Undeterred, Karen whipped out her phone and began filming the man, narrating loudly to draw attention. "This man thinks it's acceptable to spread hate in our community," she declared, pointing her camera directly at him. The man, seemingly unbothered by the sudden spotlight, continued inspecting apples, checking them for ripeness. Meanwhile, reactions from onlookers were mixed. An elderly woman near the bread counter discreetly filmed with her phone. A young couple by the milk aisle exchanged amused glances, clearly entertained. But Karen wasn't stopping. "I demand security!" she shouted, pointing dramatically at the man. Reluctantly, a young security guard in his 30s approached. He looked far from eager to get involved. Attempting to be as diplomatic as possible, he said, "Excuse me, sir, but we've received a request to ask you to remove your hat. It might cause conflicts." The man slowly turned to the guard, raising an eyebrow. His calm tone carried the weight of authority. "Young man, are you sure you want to act based on emotions? Perhaps you should call your manager." Seeing her plan unravel, Karen rolled her eyes and announced loudly, "If the manager won't come, I'm calling the police." Her declaration elicited murmurs and stifled laughs from the shoppers. Even the guard struggled to suppress a smile. "Please do, ma'am," the man said as he picked up his last apple and placed it in the bag. "After all, this is a free country." Feeling like the protagonist of her own drama, Karen dialed 911, ignoring the subtle smirks around her. "Hello, police. I'm at the grocery store on 5th Street. There's a man here wearing offensive symbols. He's disturbing the peace." Her voice was filled with melodrama. Shoppers began clustering in groups, whispering and chuckling. The man calmly continued shopping, while Karen clutched her phone, gearing up for the fight of her life. The tension in the air built, promising an explosive climax. The sound of a police siren echoed precisely 15 minutes after Karen's call. It reverberated off the store's walls, adding a sense of gravity to the scene. By now, a crowd of shoppers had gathered, forming a makeshift audience. Karen squared her shoulders, brimming with self-satisfaction, ready for the law to restore order. Two officers stepped out of the patrol car, one older, with graying temples, and the other younger, with a tense expression betraying his inexperience. They entered the store with purpose, immediately spotting Karen, who waved energetically to catch their attention. "Officers, thank you for coming so quickly," she began. "That man," Karen dramatically pointed to the man, who was now standing calmly at the checkout, holding a bag of apples. The older officer followed her finger, and as soon as his eyes landed on the man, his expression changed. He froze momentarily, then straightened as if on instinct. "Sheriff Baker?" he said in disbelief. The crowd gasped. Karen froze, as if struck by lightning. "Sheriff?" she stammered, glancing between the officer and the man. "This is a joke, right?" Sheriff Baker, who had remained composed throughout, slowly removed his MAGA hat, revealing a polished police badge beneath it. "No, ma'am," the senior officer replied, turning to Karen with a mix of disapproval and astonishment. "This is the sheriff of our county." Karen's face drained of color. But, he's wearing that hat," she squeaked. "And what of it?" Sheriff Baker asked with a faint smile, meeting her gaze. "Your concern for public order is admirable, but I think you may have overreacted." Karen opened and closed her mouth, unable to form a coherent response. Her confidence melted away like ice cream under the summer sun. The officers exchanged glances, trying to maintain professionalism, though the younger one's lips twitched. Meanwhile, the crowd didn't hold back. Some openly laughed, while others began to clap. "This is just a misunderstanding," Karen mumbled, her cheeks flushed. "I didn't know." "Exactly, ma'am," Sheriff Baker said calmly but firmly. "You didn't know. However, your approach raises concerns, especially your decision to call the police over." He gestured to his hat. "This." Someone in the crowd shouted, "She's just jealous of your style, Sheriff!" Laughter erupted across the store. Karen tried to retreat but stumbled into a cart, nearly falling. Sheriff Baker stepped closer, placing his hat back on. His tone grew serious. "Ma'am, you've wasted police resources, caused unnecessary disruption, and provoked conflict. I suggest you reconsider how you interact with others." Karen nodded, avoiding eye contact, and quickly left the store under a chorus of applause. Later that day, a video of the incident surfaced on social media. It quickly went viral, showing Karen yelling at a man in a MAGA hat, only to discover he was the sheriff. The comments poured in. "This is a masterclass in how not to behave," wrote one user. "Sheriff Baker is the real hero. Calm, polite, and full of dignity," said another. The story made local news, where Baker was praised for his composure and for reminding everyone of the importance of mutual respect. Meanwhile, Karen faced the darker side of fame. The viral video brought her widespread criticism. Neighbors avoided her, and she deactivated her social media accounts to escape the flood of negativity. However, according to some sources, Karen did learn her lesson. Weeks later, she appeared at a local church and publicly apologized to Sheriff Baker and the community. "That was my most shameful moment," she admitted, "and I hope to use it as a chance to change." Sheriff Baker continued his everyday life, and the store where the incident occurred even posted a sign in its window. "Everyone is welcome here, regardless of beliefs." When asked by a shopper if he would ever stop wearing his hat after the uproar, Baker smiled and replied, "What if it leads to another great story?" Sometimes symbols mean more than what they represent. They can divide or teach us about tolerance.